Wow. Those are the magic words. So good to see everybody again tonight. Appreciate y'all coming over. I want to call this meeting to order then. So we'll start, but one thing I want to do first off is recognize one of the people who worked tirelessly for DOT is the Division 10 engineer before Brett was Scott Cole. I understand that he passed away earlier this week, I believe on Monday. Got a little bit of some information from some of his workers. So Scott worked with NCDOT from January 1990 to August 2019. He retired from DOT at the end of 2019, at the end of August of 2019, and has been with the RS&H for the past 4 years. He served there as NC transportation leader and helped with many projects, including US 74 and I-77 South in Charlotte, as well as several municipal projects in the region. Scott's work history at DOT is division engineer September 2017 to September 2019. As Division 10 engineer, he's responsible for all project transportation planning, design, construction, operation, and asset management for a 5-county area: Anson, Cabarrus, Mecklenburg, Stanley, and Union counties. He managed 450 personnel, a fleet of equipment, and financial resources associated with every aspect of the business. Coordinated the project prioritization process and implemented with 2 MPOs and 1 RPO within the division. He was deputy division engineer from September 2012 to September of 2017. Second in command for Division 10 at that time, oversaw the creation of division managed project development, planning and design processes, creating organization with an in-house and PEF resources to successfully deliver a program. He was division traffic engineer from August 2007 to September of 2012, district engineer from August 2002 to August 2007, intelligent transportation systems engineer, incident management engineer, September 93 to August 2002, assistant district engineer, January 1990 to September of 1993. Scott also received the Order of the Longleaf Pine in 2019. So at this moment, I certainly want you to recognize that. If you just join me in just a brief moment of silence in memory of Scott. All right, everybody, thank you for that. And our condolences out to Scott's family and tough times. It was actually Monday of this week. Before we get going, I also want to realize I keep wanting to say, but reference Mark Tilley. Mark is joining us for the first time, Union County Land Use Board. And so that's Mr. Mark over there. If you want to give a brief hello, say anything to anybody.
Say hello.
Microphone, you've got a microphone in front of you, just press that one.
All right, I'd like to say hello to everybody. Look forward to learning what goes on here so I can take good information back to Union County to help us get all we can out of this.
Great. All right. Well, welcome to the table. Appreciate you being here tonight. All right. So right now we've got our agenda out in front of us. Are there any recommended changes or an adoption of that? Let's hear some motions. Craig? All right, second. Rick? Got those?
Yes.
All right, very good. Motion is up. All in favor? Unanimous. Thank you very much. All right, there is nothing on the public comment side for tonight, so I'm going to drop down to Mr. Neal to talk about ethics.
In accordance with the State Government Ethics Act, it is the duty of every board member to avoid conflict of interest. Does any board member have any known conflict of interest with respect to any of the matters coming before the board today? If so, please identify the conflict and refrain from any participation in a particular matter involved.
Hearing none, seeing none tonight. All right, so we'll drop down to the consent agenda. So can I have a motion on the consent agenda? Craig? Second. By Ed, got those? Yeah. Great. All right, the motion is up. All in favor? All right, very good. Motion passed. All right, Mr. Cook, you're going to be up on this next one here is what I'm seeing. So we got the 2055 Metropolitan Transportation Plan.
Yes, sir.
Oh,
Thank
he's up
you
there.
very
How about
much.
that?
Yes, I'm filling
What
in
happens when I
for
put
Curtis
glasses on?
tonight. He had to head out of town, unfortunately, for a funeral.
We need a mic over there, or at least the working.
So I am filling in for Curtis tonight.
Still a little light.
Still?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's on. I can
Any
hear it.
better?
Get it closer to you.
Any better?
Well,
I'll do my best.
all right, thanks.
Okay, I'll crouch down. So what will be requested is for this board to adopt county level household and employment projections for the 2025 Metropolitan Transportation Plans for Horizon years, and that'll be 2025, 2035, 2045, and 2055. Action isn't being requested tonight. It will be requested at the November meeting. And just wanted, since we do this about every 4, sometimes 5 years. And sometimes there's a little bit of confusion about what this is all about. So we wanted to actually talk at the outset about what this will not impact. So these are county level projections, and we'll get into more detail in a moment. But these are county level projections, so they won't affect funding levels or funding distribution for any project. They won't affect any local estimates of population or employment that you might be undertaking or anyone else might be undertaking. And it won't affect any local or county planning efforts. So these are for MTP development primarily. It could be used by other people, but that's what they're designed to really focus on, and not all these other issues. So just to provide you with just a few definitions or explanations. So in terms of the household projections, we are looking at expected households for each county. This is a county level total for 2025, 2035, 2045, and 2055. For employment projections, same thing, expected employment totals at the county level for each county for those same 4 horizon years. And then to explain a little bit about what a horizon year is, they're basically roughly 10-year subsets of the MTP's overall horizon. So our current MTP goes out to 2050. And the update that will soon be, well, actually, I guess with this process we're actually working on, but in detail, starting later on this year, early next year, will be the 2055 plan. So they are subsets of going from now out to year 2055. So that's what we mean by a horizon year. You also hear references in this presentation to the Metrolina regional model. You've probably heard about it before, but that's a tool to predict impacts of growth on the transportation system. For example, if we get future year travel volumes on roadways from the Metrolina regional model, then you'll also hear a reference to the Metrolina community viz model. That's a GIS-based land use model that helps us determine the location and intensity of growth, or predict the location and intensity of growth. So those are kind of the things you'll hear about during this presentation. And if you have any questions throughout, of course, please stop and ask. So what you'll be doing in November is very important, because it is really a critical first step in the development of the 2055 MTP. It's one of the very first things we have to do. And it provides direct inputs into that MRM, Metrolina Regional Model, and the MCM, the Metrolina Community Viz Model. And it really helps us as an organization and our partners in the region to better predict future travel demand. And the results of that will be hopefully improved decision-making by us as a body, and better priorities that we establish going forward with better information. The better information you have, the better decisions you can make. And we do, as I mentioned before, reassess these projections about every 4 to 5 years as a part of the process to update the MTP. And we are required under federal regulation to update the MTP every 4 years. So at this point, we don't have numbers I'm sorry.
Greg,
When will they we're gonna document the next meeting, but when will they be released? So we can see the number.
They will, and I'll be getting to that later on, but we will be talking to the technical coordinating committee next week, going over with them the numbers in depth, the draft numbers, of course, in depth. Then we'll do that again the following week when they actually are acting on them at their November meeting. So that probably as early as next week.
Great, thanks.
Yes,
Right, you know.
No
no,
problem.
that's fine. Thanks for the question. So we don't have the numbers, and one of the two basic reasons for that. We are still coordinating with our neighboring MPOs in this process. And the draft numbers, some of the early numbers we have at this point are still being compared with previous Metrolina regional model outputs. So it's probably a little too soon to call them draft at this point. So as I mentioned a moment ago, the first review of the draft totals will be with the TCC at a Wednesday transportation staff meeting on October 25th, a week from today, as a matter of fact. And then on November 1st, we'll review the draft totals with the TCC again at a Wednesday staff meeting. And then on November 2nd, that's when the TCC will act. And then they'll come to you, of course, later on in November. So just to give you a little bit of context about what we're working with here, just highlighting the region, we're working with all our regional partners, the 3 other MPOs in the area, as well as with the Rocky River RPO. So this is a regional effort to develop these county level totals. The 3 North Carolina MPOs are all on the same cycle for updating their MTPs. We're all scheduled to adopt new ones in March of 2026. And then the Rock Hill Fort Mill Area Transportation Study in South Carolina, they will update their MTP about a year ahead of us. They are on a slightly different cycle, roughly the summer of 2025. So this is a regional effort to develop these county level totals. So just wanted to talk to you a little bit about how we do this. We do have a economic development consultant who is helping us. Fourth Economy is the name of the firm. We've been working with them throughout the process. We work with data from the Bureau of Economic Analysis. Our staff, local staff, works with county and local building permit information, certificate of occupancy information. There's also employment data that we look at quite closely as we're developing these projections. And of course, the census is and the outputs of the census is a major part of what we work with. And then there's local staff research, working with all your city and town staffs to ground truth the information and make sure it's accurate. So it's a pretty intensive process to develop these county level projections. I mentioned how important it is to the development of the Metropolitan Transportation Plan. So this graphic just attempts to highlight that at a very high level. So we do have those control totals. That's another term for these county level projections. They are fed into the community viz model, or the MCM that I mentioned, that land use model. And that provides information that goes into the Metrolina regional travel demand model, or the MRM. And then that in turn informs the development of the MTP itself, principally with the fiscally constrained roadway project list. So that's really where this information is critical for us. Not just that, but that's one of the biggest components of the MTP where these control totals have an influence. So in terms of this task, there are really 4 probably key takeaways for your consideration. One is that we intend for this process, and it is one that's objective. It's based upon quite a bit of research and analysis, and these projections are very much defensible. We've gone through this process a number of times, and it's pretty much the same methodology that we've been using, kind of a tried and true process. The projections that are adopted will incorporate projections coming out of the North Carolina DOT statewide model. Also, the MRM again involves the influence and input from regional economists, and of course the current employment and household data and trends. I think it's important to note that the FHWA has advised all the MPOs in this region to prioritize consistency in the approach, and we have been consistent over the years in terms of the socioeconomic data development. We've been doing it this way for past 3 or 4 MTP cycles. And then again, we reassess these every 4 to 5 years with the MTP development. So we don't let these sit on the shelf and just use these same projections with each iteration of the MTP. So back to the schedule and our next step. So we're here tonight to provide this information to you. With the TCC will review this information again starting next week, and then the following Wednesday. We'll be working during that time to fine tune all the projections and then come back to the TCC, come back to you as a board in November for action. And that'll be preceded by action to recommend the county level projections by the TCC at their November 2nd meeting. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
All right. Thank you, Bob. Any questions for our presenter, Craig? Microphone, Craig.
When those projections are available for us to kind of just browse, recognizing that they're not final until they're approved,
Right.
but how will we be notified so we can ask or get, I'm really interested in this information and for a variety of reasons, and maybe just curious, I don't know, but
No, we can, I think probably the best thing to do might be, now they'll be in your agenda packet, of course, that we send out, but we
Right,
can
but
even
that's-
send them out earlier, perhaps right after the TCC makes its recommendation on the 2nd and get them out to you that way. So they will be the official recommended projections for you following the November 2nd meeting. Will that work for you?
that would be great.
Okay.
If you could do that,
Certainly.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Anybody else? Any questions around? I don't miss any as I crane around. Bob, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, next up, we have Andy up for functional classification revision requests. Another substitute.
No, I'm it.
You're it.
I'm it, yep. Good evening, as Andy Grimsky, Charlotte DOT, and I'm gonna bring 2 functional classification revision requests to this board. Just a little background, these 2 streets are in the southwest area of the city, the Steel Creek area of Charlotte. And what we are asking for is, first of all, Brown Greer Arrowwood from Steel Creek Road over to 45. He changed from a local street in a functional federal classification to a major collector. And then Sandy Porter Road from Shopton down to NC 49 or South Tryon Street, changing from a local to a minor collector. The primary reason for these is really just to recognize a lot of the growth that has happened down in that area. These roads serve 3 different schools in their area: Barrowick Residential Development, Whitehall Office Development, and the Airsley Mixed Use Development. So really, in recognition of this area becoming more urban, we are asking that it be added to the federal functional classification system as well as the federal aid system. This would also allow us to seek federal funding for these streets in the future. So with that, next steps are, this is information tonight, but I'll be bringing this back to the TCC and the board next month for action. After this board takes action, it will be forwarded to the NCDOT for final review and eventually to the Federal Highway Administration for final approval. So with that, any questions on this request?
All right, any questions? This is for next month. So any questions for our presenter? All right,
Thank you.
that's easy. All right, thank you very much. All right, moving on. Next up, Kendall. This is Beyond 77 mobilization update.
Evening, everyone. I am Kendall Clan with CRTPO, and with me is Brian Powers representing RSNH. I will be providing the update on the Beyond 77 mobilization, and Brian will be presenting on the alternative funding.
Okay, definitely. We're gonna have to do something with that mic sometime going forward. It's a little hard to hear, so.
First, I'll give a brief background on the study, the outputs from the study, then the mobilization phase, followed by recent developments. Then I will pass it over to Brian. Here is a timeline of the pre-study. In May 2013, CRTPO recommended a study of all travel corridors, including I-77. We were awarded state planning and research funds from NCDOT in 2018, and the study began the following year. The Beyond 77 study took place from September 2019 to January 2022. The goal of the study was to find new and innovative ideas and to generate comprehensive recommendations with a immediate to long-term vision in mind. The CRTPO board adopted this study in January of 2022. Lastly, the study focused on the operations of the network around the I-77 corridor. Here are the four major outputs from the study. First, the SUITS application. This is an online tool that houses the 286 recommendations that were developed from the study. Next, the FAST application. This is also an online tool that Brian will go in depth about. And lastly, the marketing plan and the launch of the Beyond 77 website. Here is a timeline of the mobilization phase. This phase began after the adoption of the study. In May of 2022, we assembled a task force. In the summer of 2022, we set in place a marketing plan that is still ongoing. We held implementer meetings last month. And lastly, the coalition, which will be what we use to close this phase and begin the next chapter of Beyond 77. We established a task force to guide us through the mobilization phase. From May 2022 to this past August, we held 8 task force meetings and we accomplished the 4 goals we were aiming for. First, the review and approval of the marketing plan. Second, coordination with other major initiatives such as Connect Beyond. Third, the review of the shortlist recommendations. And lastly, the analysis of the alternative funding ideas identified in the study. Initially, this was called the implementation phase, but due to task force input, we switched to mobilization. Lastly, the task force helped us recruit the attendees needed for our implementer meetings. The purpose of the implementer meetings was to get thoughts and opinions on the recommendations identified by our task force and our alternative funding mechanisms. From these meetings, we saw the benefit in developing the Beyond 77 coalition. The coalition aims to form a partnership between our local jurisdictions and our partner organizations to successfully implement the Beyond 77 recommendations. Recent developments. Over the past few weeks, staff has been meeting internally with the goal of reducing the number of recommendations. The reason for this is a lot of time has passed since they were first created, and some of them are simply no longer relevant. In meeting with our partner organizations such as Central Alignment and CDOT, we've noticed that they have similar recommendations with the same intent/structure. So in the upcoming months, we will be back, hopefully not me, to ask for approval to remove recommendations from the Beyond 77 initiative. And I will now pass it over to Brian.
Excellent. Thank you. And I'm a little shorter, so this might work a little better on the microphone, hopefully. Again, my name is Brian Powers. So good evening, everyone. I'm here to actually talk about an effort that sprung up from the mobilization that Kendall actually just worked us through here. And what I want to talk about is some of the key objectives of my initiative related to this. We are basically working to increase the stakeholder familiarity with this term called alternative funding. And as many are probably familiar, transportation projects, they're incredibly expensive. And as we go through and as technology continues to improve, this conversation is continually evolving and growing across the nation, locally, and within our region. So building upon some of the efforts that were already done in the last plan, as Kendall mentioned, in January of 22 that was adopted, there were 6 alternatives that came forward from that. We will go through the 4 that have come forward, but what I do want to highlight is that this initiative is the intent of pushing 2 or 3 a little bit closer and then continuing the conversations with the task force that was mentioned and the implementer group. And I will discuss the FAST application, which is available online. I'll run through a very brief tutorial about how it's used, and that generally generates a handful of questions, so I'm happy to answer as well. So just want to highlight that we understand that this is not a conversation that is happening in a vacuum. These are some of the organizations that are a little bit more local to us that are also working on and considering alternative funding moving forward. And then if we were to expand this to the nation, we could cover the entire white space there. So jumping forward, these were the 6 in our second column there where you see source. We have roughly grouped them into sales, property, and registration. But just to name the 6 that came forward from that previous plan: sales tax, motor fuels tax, motor vehicle sales tax, property tax, all encompassing, a specific to vehicle property tax, and then a vehicle registration fee. And then there's some brief descriptions. I won't read through each one, but to give everyone an idea of what these are, we've included current ranges as they exist or are approximate. As we've gone through this process, through coordination with the stakeholder groups, the task force, and the implementers, we've actually highlighted the 3 that are in our sales group there, and the bottom one in our registration group. Those are the ones that continually came up in conversation. You'll see that the property tax information there, it's crossed out. That's because the task force identified that as probably less feasible and less carried forward in the conversation. So I'll give a brief intro, and again, I won't make you listen to me read through each of one of these, but we wanted to highlight some of the key considerations for each one of the sources that we're moving forward. And then one of the main things that we've heard throughout this process is just the understanding of whether or not those funds can be directly managed locally as it stands now, or if it would require additional legislation. And so as we move forward, the next 3 slides are going to look very similar to this. It'll highlight a source and then move through. Jumping forward, motor fuel sales tax. I like to highlight this one because this is something that is generally the main source of transportation funding across the nation. The reason we are having these conversations, vehicles are becoming less, or in some cases not reliant on gasoline. So there's less input into the general revenue sources, which of course, as we all know, we're all driving more and more. And so that wear and tear on the roadways. So moving forward, this is one of those items that you want to consider. Thinking about motor vehicle sales tax, currently in North Carolina, we have the highway use tax, which is at 3%. Modifications of that could be considered. Currently, it is not held at the current sales tax rates. It's locked in the 3%. And then registration fees, certain types of vehicles, certain types of weights, electric versus gasoline. These are all some of the nuanced options that could be considered when we're thinking about this. There are some existing abilities to apply certain fees, but depending upon the fee that's being assessed or envisioned, there may be some modification required at the legislative level. And in the middle here, so what I've done is I've highlighted each of the 4, and using the FAST app, which I will highlight here in just a moment, some approximate revenues that could happen from our 3-county area, and including the entirety of Union County as part of this model. A 1% sales tax could be 18 billion, for example. If we were to skip down a $50 registration fee, that might net something right around $2 billion. And I will note that these figures are based off of the tool that is available online, and the figures are based and active from when the study was completed in 22. So as we've gone through and we've advanced, some of these dollar amounts may not be exact, but they're intended to give you a ballpark of what could be feasible. As we've gone through, the biggest thing I want to highlight is right there across the top, and it's the PowerPoint faux pas to have such a long sentence, but I think this is important, is that the stakeholders that we've engaged with desired to continue the discussions on alternative funding and expressed interest in a coalition or a working group that is dedicated to these continued conversations. This is a very in-depth subject, and we want to make sure that we're not rushing into it or pushing anything forward that shouldn't be. And I've highlighted a handful. Basically, you will see between the task force and the implementers, these were the ones that came forward. It ranked 1 to 3, but there is a little bit of variation in the groups. So as I mentioned, I will run through this briefly. This is the FAST app as is available on the Beyond 77 website. When you click into it, you can, for lack of a better word, play around with it, understand different municipalities at the county level. You can click on them and it'll allow you to filter, it'll allow you to change values. So I'll highlight a handful of things very quickly for us. Right here in this first box, this is your alternative funding sources. So it highlights what you have filtered out. Over here, your location and your year and the funding amount that's possible with the tool. The overall anticipated revenues are shown in a handful of different ways, depending upon how you like to view data. Everyone views it differently. These will help out with that. And then we have a filtering option, and you can click into it, filter out what is important to you. In an example, I've chosen Mecklenburg and then sales tax. Moving forward, if I take those filters, move it down, we've changed our numbers down to about 15 billion, some small number like that. We can go to the next page of this tool and we can estimate what types of infrastructure could be potentially put on the ground. And this is where I want to take the opportunity to highlight that the effort that we are engaged in now is not for any specific mode or any particular type, but we want to make sure that you have the ability and the knowledge to utilize this tool moving forward. In this example, I did 50-50 split between sidewalks and multi-use paths. I'll pass it back over.
Next steps, we'll be having our 9th and final task force meeting tomorrow afternoon. We will continue reviewing the recommendations list to see what can be consolidated or deleted. We will continue working on the Beyond 77 coalition. And lastly, we'll be working on developing a technical memorandum for the FAST application. And with that,
All right, we have a couple of questions
Yeah,
from Ron.
sure.
We'll go with Lee Altman first.
Thank you so much. Appreciate the presentation. First of all, am I correct in remembering this analysis and discussion from one that occurred at the airport with others of you? Okay,
It
like
did.
6 months or a year ago. And remind me, what is our authority? Because this has got to be something that's made by the General Assembly, decided by the General Assembly. So are you mostly just informing us of what they're deliberating about? Or I just want to understand what our role here is in the ask for our action going forward.
Yes, absolutely. That's a wonderful question. So to answer the first part of it, the CRTPO does not have a taxing authority. So you would not be able to directly implement one of the fees or taxes that we're suggesting. At this stage, what we are proposing is the continued conversation that can take many forms. The groups that we engaged with as part of the task force and the implementers, they suggested that a coalition dedicated to the conversations of these alternative funding sources to not only garner local public support, but increase understanding of them, and whether that eventually turns into legislative action, that is to be determined in the future.
This is where we get the information to lobby with to our state legislators. This is where we get to gather up things to talk about with them. And again, the coalition will be another group that hopefully that they can influence the state electeds in there to make these changes. So you're right, we don't have the taxing authority in there, but we should understand this better so we can better direct our efforts towards the state.
And Mr. Chairman, will we be having a vote as a sense of the body to speak as one, or will that not ever happen on this
I
subject?
don't think that that's ever happened, but I don't see that it's impossibility.
No, I was
to
just
get
wondering.
consensus on some direction as a body that we could do
Right.
that.
And do you, sir, have any sense of the timeline for decision-making with the General Assembly on this?
Well, that would vary pretty significantly. So I will say no is the shortest answer on that one.
Thank you.
Craig,
Following up on that line of question about the General Assembly, I would think that both House and Senate Transportation chairs would be anxious for a presentation to their committees. The challenge is that we're going in this way. I'm no longer there. They're going into short session, which means, of course, they can't introduce any new legislation, sort of, because there's always a way. But I would suspect that this is a much more long-term project, so we need to be looking ahead to the new General Assembly of 25, 26.
That'd be correct.
But plans should be laid to communicate with the chairs of transportation, both House and Senate, for the results of what we're doing now be presented to those committees so that they can and perhaps our recommendations so that we can get a legislation if necessary.
Okay, we'll follow up with that. I'll let Tony, you want to go?
To this point, Senator Sawyer, who is from this region, is one of the House or the Senate Transportation Chairs and has for a number of years, as you probably know, Craig, been having consensus building conversations about ways to increase revenue. And so, this type of information, however it flowed up to her, either collectively from this group or individuals or whatever, I'm sure could find its way into that discussion.
If I may, this issue is not new to the General Assembly. We've had, going back to several terms ago, I remember being involved in these discussions. So, and one might also remember that the 25-26 General Assembly year, the budget begins in the Senate, not in the House. And that's of value actually to us because of Senator Sawyer. But we need the House to be equally as enthusiastic about solving this problem.
Nicely put. Ed,
So at a meeting at the Alliance within the last year or so, the speaker talked about revenue sources that were being considered, enumerated these. There was one other one he referred to that does come up in these conversations about taxing miles driven. Was that not part of the investigation?
Yeah, so that was actually a consideration in the original study that was done, but given the scale of what would be necessary for mileage-based user fees, that would require basically a statewide, regional, when you're thinking about multi-state cooperation at that level. In many cases, those are and have been relatively successful from what I've seen in pilot cases. But when we're talking about geography, they lose their effectiveness if you have the rule in municipalities or even an MPO, and then you start thinking about folks that travel in and out of the MPOs. The conversation can get quite convoluted pretty quickly. In the Beyond 77 report, there is a subsection in there that talks about longer range considerations, and I believe it is outlined in that as well.
Tony, you
So-
wanted to weigh in? Again, you up?
I'm not done yet.
Okay, sorry.
Sorry. One thing that was clear from his remarks was, one, he's very aware of these topics and of this discussion. On that occasion, he came up with reasons why each of these would actually be difficult for different reasons. And therefore, he did not see an easy way forward. So it needs more work. If a new revenue source was developed, would the proceeds go into the Highway Trust Fund, or where would they actually be realized in the budget?
Yeah, so with that comes into the nuance of how the law would be written or the fee or tax. So I wouldn't be able to tell you exactly how it would go. I will say that many of these do directly go up to the state level and then are passed out. Depending upon what is written, that would vary pretty significantly on the nuance of the outcome.
So from the local level, that's a pretty hairy nuance, but yes, I understand what
yeah.
you're saying. If there is some sort of referendum, or if you actually need popular acceptance of the new revenue, is that a statewide determination binding on everybody, or is it done locally, or how exactly will the popular process work?
Yes, so I hate to keep using nuance, but that would depend very much on what scale the consideration is. There are some that I mentioned, registration fees, that would be very much at the more local level. You're already allowed to assign that, on my Charlotte registration, I always had an extra fee that was associated with that. If we're talking about sales tax, there is one already in place in this area that could be applied at the local level that wouldn't require significant input at the statewide level. Other ones, if we were to start assessing additional registration fees beyond what is allowed, or attempting to modify sales taxes beyond, to use my two examples, that would require legislative action, very likely, and then again, that nuance aspect of it.
Because of course, we have a regional plan that is predicated on a 1 cent sales tax within the Connect Beyond geography, or certainly within Mecklenburg County. How exactly does this move forward? So you're doing this work, they're already looking at it. I have talked to Senator Sawyer, Newton, Berger. But what will be the impetus for actual decisions by the legislature?
So I can't speak to the drive at the end towards the legislation, whether that be the coalition that we've been discussing, but the intent of our effort now is basically to set up the foundation and increase the understanding, and potentially identify the individuals who would be potentially on that first task force or coalition related to this effort. Because once that happens, it becomes out of the realm of just the study and the data behind it, which we're working to work on. And then it gets into how far the coalition decides to go as a unit and what they decide to push forward.
This is very valuable work to help them make an informed decision. So I appreciate what you're doing. Thank you.
It is a great deal of work. And again, we use different words, different terminologies, coalition, but basically you're talking people to be able to, who's going to carry it forward as we move on. So Tony, you had a question?
I was just gonna say, I
do.
do think. Sorry, you calling on me?
No, I was just acknowledging.
Really valuable to participate in these kinds of conversations. And as Craig noted, they've been going on for a long time, and there are groups having this conversation all over the state, and advocacy groups for this kind of thing, the state chamber, a group called NC Go, and industry groups. And, this group could add its voice both as a group as well as whatever the will was of the individual municipalities to sort of the chorus that's really saying, we just need to have this conversation. And all kinds of things are being talked about all the time. And so I think there's high value. I do question a bit the value of us using our time to try to hammer out which we think is more feasible or not, because it's all going to be decided by the legislature down the road anyway. But if we're having a really robust conversation, because they will hear that and feel it, and so that's the best use of our time.
Okay, John?
Yes, to kind of add on to what Councilman Driggs said, I was a little surprised that your presentation tonight didn't delve more into how electric vehicles are going to be pay their fair share. I mean, you've got a shrinking pot of gasoline. You can't just keep adding, making a tax higher and higher and higher and higher on less and less gas being purchased. So is the intent that if you don't do a per mile charge, that all that would come through sales tax and registration, which would be different for electrical vehicles than fossil fuel vehicles?
Correct. So I do want to highlight that at our stage, we won't get to the specific, we'll identify some of the nuance that could be written into the laws, but we won't have that exact answer for you. But while we'll talk to it, electric vehicles, as you rightly said, are one of the major concerns when you're thinking about a lot of our transportation funding coming from gas taxes. There are already different registration prices in certain areas and around the nation. That's a method of collecting what would be the gas tax input. Some of these items that we're discussing, they would impact everyone, sales taxes, we removed the property taxes from the discussion, but things of that nature would also do that. But you're totally right. If we were to only modify the gasoline tax, that would only impact those using petrol services.
I think the usage, pay by mile makes a lot of sense. I don't know how you would implement that if you geofence the whole state or whatever, but
Pretty much.
that seems to be a fair way to collect the tax to me anyway.
Before we transition, I'll add to that comment, Ed.
Mayor Higdon, I just wanted to point out, I've had that conversation a number of times. The paradox is the federal government is subsidizing these EVs, right? And the break they got on the gas tax was considered part of the incentive towards this cleaner mode of transportation. And then you backtrack a bit when you try to make them participate in the costs. So I think that's something that needs to be resolved. But it was looked at and then decided not to pursue. There was also a discussion about putting some sort of special sales tax on them, like an upfront tax in order to try and make them pay their share. And again, the same problems. It's like runs counter to the goal of encouraging people to buy them.
It's just the same as the federal government subsidizing tobacco farmers and then paying billions to
Yes.
encourage people not to
Yeah,
smoke.
that's
So-
Moving at the speed of government.
Mark,
Well, I've been in trucking about all my life, and in trucking business, they monitor our miles traveled and through the states by IFTA. And then regardless of where your fuel's bought, they dilly out the fuel tax for the miles you drive. Well, in North Carolina, I'm not sure about the electric cars, but we all have to get our car inspected once a year. And that inspection goes with our county taxes and all that for our vehicle. And if one of the vehicles happened to be a car that traveled out of state and you kept up with that mileage, you would have a way to say what you drove in North Carolina and what you didn't, like we have for years. So that would be an easy way to track the miles, because really and truly the inspections department already track it. When they download the thing, it's already tracked on your emissions form you get. So that would be an easy way to track it. And then, like I said, if somebody travels out of state a lot, all they'd have to do is just keep up with their miles in the other states, and then you'd have to have a way to not be charged for those miles.
right. That might be some of the difficulties as the out-of-state travel, so. But all up to the coalition people to figure that out before we go forward, if you will. So that's a good suggestion as well. So any other thoughts, questions around the table? All right, seeing none. Thank you, guys. Appreciate that. I think you got a lot of work ahead of you to do, but it's a good start. We're gonna have to address this one way, shape, or form sometime in the future. It's coming.
Thank you.
Early start. Very good. Thank you both. All right, next up, Luke Lowry. We have the Transit Providers Work Group. Some talk and some next steps.
Hey everyone, I'm a little bit shorter, so hopefully we won't have an issue with the mic
That'll
right
work really
here.
well.
So I just want to give you a very brief update, not take too much of your time up, but my name's Luke. I'm from Central Atlanta Regional Council, and we are, let me see, have we advanced the slide? Perfect. Yep, so we are in the process of helping CRTPO facilitate the startup of the Transit Providers Work Group. So in brief, the Transit Providers Work Group is being started to help provide a means for the coordination and collaboration of public transportation planning within the CRTPO planning area. And I think we all know that transit planning is not easy, and especially on the staff level, there's a lot of complications, and CRTPO has seen over the past several years that there's really a need to bring together staff representatives from the planning agencies and other agencies within their planning area to coordinate on public transportation. You can see to the right, I'll talk a little bit more about membership of this group, but the focus is really on the CRTPO planning area, which is in red. The primary transportation planning agency or transit agencies within that area are CATS, ICATS, UCT and MTS, so Union County, Mecklenburg County, Iredell County, and Charlotte. But there's also some other agencies, including Central Atlanta Regional Council, the Metro Atlanta Regional Modeling Team that intersect and will be part of this group as well. But a little bit about the background, because this really is not just a group that's meeting to meet. There's a need that's been identified. First, CRTPO had a staffing and resources study, which recommended an increased focus on transit planning. And then in June 2020, there was a Transit Education Initiative Task Force that was formed, and this helped lay the foundation for a shared understanding of federal funding for public transit, and eventually resulted in a recommended update for the allocation of FTA Section 5307 funds. And then through that work, there was a memorandum of understanding on Section 5307 funding that was developed and agreed to by the CRTPO transit providers. And through that work, bringing together agencies to do that work, that's where a lot of this need was identified for additional collaboration on issues like funding for the agencies involved. So CRTPO staff conducted surveys in the summer of 2021 and fall of 2022 to gather a greater understanding of some of the topics that might be addressed in this working group, who the participants might be and what the priorities would be. And that led us to Central Atlanta being involved in the facilitation of this group. We did some one-on-one discussions with agencies who were invited to be part of this group, just to get additional information. So all that to say, there's been a lot that has built up to the place that we're at now, which is the kickoff of this group. So being a new group, we're working on developing a draft charter. And just in brief, some of the things that this charter addresses are the goals of the group, the membership, and then just the practical logistics. And the goals as of now in the draft charter are, one, to enhance collaboration, to serve as a forum for collaboration amongst the CRTPO planning area public transportation providers. It's also to provide support to maximize the utilization of funding sources. And the primary ones of focus are Section 5303 and Section 5307. Also, one goal is to assist with performance-based planning and programming activities. And then finally, to improve transit planning education and to provide practical skill building and information for the staff and the membership agencies. So in terms of membership, kind of the technical criteria to be a member of this group is all agencies that administer or receive Section 5303 or 5307 funding within the CRTPO planning area. So that includes those transit entities that I had mentioned earlier. So Charlotte Area Transit System, Union County Transportation, Mecklenburg Transportation System, and Iredell County Area Transportation System. But it also includes other agencies, including Central Atlanta Regional Council, NCDOT Integrated Mobility Division, the Metro Atlanta Travel Demand Model Team, and then CRTPO as well. One of the feedback that we heard early on from the group is, is the need for added flexibility to have other representatives be part of the group, even if they're not going to be consistent members in every meeting. So we also included a subject matter expert category in membership, and these are just non-voting representatives with background and knowledge about federal and state transportation funding mechanisms, who we're going to be bringing into some of these upcoming meetings. And really the major takeaway in terms of logistics is Central Atlanta is facilitating the first 6 months of the formation of this group. And after that 6-month period, CRTPO will become the full-time administrator of the group. And right now we're having monthly meetings just as we're getting running. But the goal is to likely switch to quarterly meetings once the group is fully realized. So in brief, we've had our kickoff meeting. It was held on September 12th at Central Atlanta's offices. You can see some lovely pictures on the right for that first meeting. And some of the main topics that were covered in that meeting were just the background and context for the group, which I've shared at a very high level today. We shared the draft charter with them and got feedback from them. And we did some engagement around work group curriculum, because really a major focus for this group is it being driven by the participants themselves, for them to identify what needs they have and to set the curriculum themselves. So we had our kickoff meeting on September 12th. And then, back one. Well, anyways, basically that last slide was just saying that we had our second meeting yesterday, and we just further dove into some of those topics around identifying curriculum. And we also had our first subject matter experts to come in and brief participants on section 5303 and 5307. So starting to get some really practical education for participants in the group already. And then we just have 3 more upcoming meetings this November and December and January of next year. So that's really it. Love to answer any questions you might have, but that's the transit provider work group in a nutshell.
So we implemented this last year, or actually earlier this year, if I remember right. What's the anticipated kind of start date for your group to get going?
So we are in the, we have technically started. Like I said, we're in a 6-month startup period where Centralina, as a neutral third party, is helping facilitate the startup of the group while we're still doing things like developing the draft charter.
I guess what I was looking for is the end date when you have all that done. So you're up and operational. What is your anticipated?
Yeah,
up and
so the
operational
last
date?
meeting that Centralina will be facilitating is that January meeting. So around January, February is when that transition to CRTPO being the full-time facilitator is going to happen.
Okay, that was my question. Anybody else? Ed?
So is your goal to define what grants to apply for? Like exactly what kind of money to ask for? Is that the bottom line of this process?
It's a potential goal. I wouldn't say it's the bottom line. What we've heard a lot from participants so far is that for grants that they're already applying to, that there's just some need for additional education on things like even the timeline, the steps that need to happen. But certainly a goal could be that by just having these peer sharing opportunities or bringing in some subject matter experts, that new funding sources might be discovered. So it's kind of a both and.
So kind of optimize our process for accessing those funds. What typically are the amounts of these grants? I mean, what magnitudes are we talking about normally?
Yeah, is Jarrell in the room? I might to him. Yeah, Jarrell is the CRTPO lead on this as well.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Jarrell Leonard, transit planner for CRTPO. So the main 2 grants that are discussed in the group is section 5303. On average, it's approximately, for federal share, about $1 million annually. For the 5307, which was mentioned, it's the last couple of years, it's been approximately 19 to 20 million federal share. So if that answers your question.
And they are basically mainly to assist with planning, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Planning, distribution, maximization of allocation, or collaboration amongst the different providers
Right.
in the CRTPO planning area.
Well, we need to get as much of that as we can, right? All right, thank you.
Everything's all set. Tony, did you have your hand up?
Is this group working yet or at all on the seamless connectivity between the agencies so that, for example, somebody could plan a trip starting in Ryder and Concord, but have it just connect seamlessly to a CATS trip?
Yeah, so collaboration is definitely part of this group's purview. Seamless Connections is related, obviously, in that the agencies who are part of this group are going to be part of that conversation. So, but Seamless Connections is kind of a separate entity, but certainly as we have conversations around the collaboration in this group, we'll be getting as much feedback as possible to contribute into the seamless conversations as we can.
And to kind of further elaborate, that portion is more tied to Connect Beyond. There is service coordination that will be integrated into the group with the providers in the CRTPO area, such as CAPS to Union County, as well as Iredell County, as well as MTS. Others such as what you mentioned, like CK Rider or Concord, Kannapolis Rider Transit, they will be potentially considered as a regional partner who could be brought in when those conversations related to Connect Beyond come about. So they are aware of this group's formation, but they're not official members because they're not in the CRTPO planning area.
All right. A lot of things to digest on that one. All right, any other questions for our presenters? Anybody else we can drag out of the audience? Huh? So, all right. Well, thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate that.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Drew.
All right, next up, Miss Loretta. There you are. Well, they're already making your way up. So we're talking about the Federal Certification Review Report. Welcome back.
Yes, thank you.
And you'll even fit the microphone even better.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I'm even shorter. It got better. Good evening. I'm Loretta Barron with the Federal Highway Administration. Thank you for having me this evening. I just wanted to share, no presentation, just wanted to share briefly the outcome of the Federal Certification Review that we conducted back in June with CRTPO. I want to start out first by thanking Bob and Neil and the staff and Judy and the staff for helping me plan the review and conduct the advertising. That's always important as we do the review because we're required to seek some public feedback. We did not receive any, which was a shock. But I do want to thank them publicly for all their assistance and their great help. We did conduct this review about a little over a year early. We were trying to reschedule, reorganize our reviews. We had, I think, a lot that came into the 200,000 and over population with the 2000 census. And so we were drilling out reports like every other month or so, and we thought we would try and spread them out a little bit. So we moved everybody. Everybody felt the pain that CRTPO felt when we came in about a year early to do this review. But it does move their next review out 4 years from July. Yeah, the end of July, 4 years from that date. But the review revealed that we made 3 recommendations of options that CRTPO should consider as they begin to update their 2055 MTP. That is to better address their congestion management plan and to look at the outcomes and make sure that that process is functioning properly, to address tourism and to address resiliency and stormwater better as they develop the 2055 MTP. We also made a recommendation, or I'm sorry, a commendation to the MPO, supporting them and their efforts as they addressed EJ and the EJ analysis that they've done in their 2050 MTP. And so we're very proud of that work. We have probably only a few in the state who get it right, who do it right. And so I'm very pleased with the efforts they put in to address EJ in the 2050 MTP. I am aware that the MPO is currently working on updating their CMP, and our staff is working with them on that update. So we are sure that it will be good and meet federal requirements when the 2055 MTP comes out. We will also be working with them on the other 2 recommendations as they work to develop the upcoming 2055 MTP. So I don't have any doubts that they will address these efforts and not have these 3 recommendations appear the next go round. And so I think that those are the highlights of the review. I think you all got a copy of the report probably in August, maybe, but I will be happy to address any questions that you might have.
All right. Thank you, Loretta. Any questions on the table? All right. I think we're good. I think you get to
Thank
adjust
you.
to the microphone one more time later. Okay? Did you want one?
Maybe I should
You
give
want
all the
to throw one up, right?
presentations. My voice is breaking.
Yeah. Thank you, Loretta. Appreciate that. All right. Next up is always one of our favorite topics, but this is
Hooray.
hooray. All right, so we all just got dropped on us this packet. This is not, and we're not gonna have a test in 5 minutes on it. It's pretty serious work here that's being developed. This is topic 11 on the I-77 North Express Lane responses. And a lot of this work was in response to looking at earlier some of the, we'll call it sore spots in the prior agreement. And a lot of that, of course, we know is cast in concrete by legal agreement between the parties of Mobility Partners and NCDOT. So a lot of the work is between, a lot of the question and answers has to go from us, this body, up through DOT to get cooperative effort from Mobility Partners. In the last few weeks, I think that it's been realized that there's a pretty heavy lift here in getting all this information. As you can see in this packet here, it's quite substantial. A lot of work has been done on both parties. What I wanted to do today is just make sure, number one, that we had something to start with to try to trim that tree, the low hanging fruit for a little bit. It's a lot. Again, you can see this is just their responses. There's going to be some more responses, I'm sure, coming forward when you start to sift through this stuff. The idea today is to hand this to you. And even though we wanted to have it a couple days earlier, I kind of felt like when I was talking to David Garcia that there was going to be a pretty healthy packet. And certainly at this time of the year where you got election season for a lot of us out there, didn't want to give you guys 4 days and say test on Friday, you know, kind of stuff. So this is for your consumption. This is for you to digest, to go through. You got a month, because what's going to happen next month is I've invited and got commitment from David Garcia over at Mobility and NCDOT. We'll invite them to the table somewhere on here, and we'll be able to go through each and every one of these. We're going to devote more time during our meeting. We're going to have a little bit lighter agenda on one side, so we can devote more time to go through these individually. Now, you may review this information right now and look at, oh, okay, I got that answer, cross that off the list. You know, make sure that we don't waste any time on things that may or may not have been as important as they might have been when we started this process a few months back. So if you can eliminate some of those by the answers that are contained in this packet, that's great. If not, keep it on there. If as you go through this packet again today or in the ensuing, 4 weeks before our next meeting, then please submit those questions through to Neil so we can wrap them into, if we need more answers from certain other questions that were revealed because of this research, then we'll add that to it and try to get that contained. But the goal is to have them here. Everybody's been very cooperative in doing this. Doesn't seem to be any pushback to not answer the questions, and that's what we're here for. So again, this is a cooperative and collaborative effort. We don't have a direct line to them as far as we can't demand on them what to provide to us because their contractual obligation is between them and DOT. But I think it's been a real good effort to start a good show of faith. And even if it wasn't this group to go forward, at least now we're going to fix the ills of the past and make sure that anything that we may or may not decide to could have been done better some years back, no matter who the provider is or what the financing arrangement will be going forward, at least now we got a base set to make some corrective action from. So if that's fair enough to you guys, I think that's where we're heading on this. Next time, you had a question, Lee?
I just want to thank our chairman, Mayor Pappas, for your perseverance on this. Thank you for continuing to carry the ball down the field for us and just gaining transparency and understanding some of the questions that have, shall I say, haunted and plagued us. I think that's a very worthwhile endeavor for the public in this public forum, for the public to hear, since obviously there's a legitimate, tremendous interest on the subject. But mostly I just want to say thank you.
Well, you're welcome, and I appreciate the comment. It is a little bit of a dog with a bone with me on this a little bit. I've learned a lot on it as well, and in some side conversations I can, I have shared some of that. There's some things, but I want it to be brought forward to all of you so you understand it. So going forward, when we plan, I don't think there's any way to avoid the improvements that are needed in our transportation corridors. It's now how do we do it and how we fund it, just like the conversation we just had on how to get revenue up when you have declining use and fuel and things like that. So I think that's going to be important. This is the establishment of they say they want us to have a voice at the table. We want to have a voice at the table at some level. Maybe we're not the total decision makers, but at least we would want to give some endorsement of whatever is going to go forward. I'm not saying one way or another, but at least work collaboratively, I'm getting tired already, with DOT going forward so they can make, as we talked about earlier, an informed decision and the best decision that's available to us. So take your time, go through this stuff, but do be ready to talk about it. If there's any questions that you had before that are answered in this packet, then you can take those off your list and let us know that so we can not have to go through all those, but be ready next time to be able to talk about these things. Any other thoughts and questions on this one? Because I'm gonna make it real easy for you tonight. That means Neil, you're up if there aren't any. All right, we'll move to the next item then. Neil.
Okay. The November 15th CRTPO board agenda is anticipated to include the following action items. The 2055 socioeconomic data item will be back with the request that the board adopt the county level population and employment projections for the 2025, 35, 45, and 55 horizon years. Following the TCC recommendation at the meeting on November 7th, staff will email you a copy of that presentation so you can review that in advance of receiving the packet with that information that you're expected or anticipated to act on. The Charlotte functional classification revision request that Andy Grimsky presented on this evening will be back on the board agenda in November for action. Also, the December 2023 meeting cancellation and 2024 meeting dates, provided that there is not a reason for this board to meet. We typically put that on the consent agenda to cancel the December meeting and also to endorse the dates for the 2024 CRTPO meetings. There's one information report that well, actually two now, but the first one is an initial update on the FY 2025 Unified Planning Work Program development process. We begin that process in the fall, something we do every year at CRTPO's budget. So that's just an initial update. And then the second information item was the previous item that we just discussed, just some additional information with the I-77 mobility partners as well as NCDOT here to answer or provide additional information on any questions. So just a reminder from Chair Pappas, if there are questions that you feel have been adequately answered within your packet, email me, or if there's additional information that's not contained within the packet, also email me and I'll make sure to get that to Chair Pappas as well as the mobility partners and NCDOT. And then to save the dates in 2024, the first of which is the 2024 CRTPO orientation that will be held on Thursday, January 11th from 4 to 7 in room 267 right here in this building. And we hold this after the municipal elections every 2 years with the primary goal of educating the new delegates and alternates that are joining the board, but also it's a refresher for those of you all that will be joining us again in 2024. So we're working on that program now. We'll have some additional information about that event pretty soon. And then further out, the 2024 joint MPO roundtable with the Gaston Cleveland Lincoln MPO and the CRTPO board. That is scheduled for Thursday, February 29th, 2024 from 5:30 to 8:30. Still working on a location for that. That is the event that some of you attended back in May, where on an annual basis, we get the governing boards with GCL and CRTPO together to discuss common topics. We placed a lot of emphasis at the May meeting on alternative transportation funding. I suspect that will probably be a theme again. In fact, I know that we'll have somebody from the Pennies for Progress program from York County, South Carolina, giving an update as to how that the mechanics of that work down in South Carolina. Maybe there's some adaptation we could utilize in our planning area. So those are the updates that I have, Chair.
Is that the meeting at the airport?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. All right, thank you, Neil. I appreciate that. A lot of things that we've accomplished this year gone through, so appreciate everybody's tenacity and, keeping all the Q&A sensibly placed. I wanted to say also, I got to believe that we're not the only ones dealing with lack of revenue or reduced revenue from electrification of vehicles and how to supplant that. So I'm going to bet there's a lot more help around the country that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. So if we could resource that internally. If there's somebody that has a connection, I know Jim might probably has a connection, connect up with Neil and we can probably start to steer that a little bit where it can get, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel on that one. And so again, not that it's our final decision-making process, but it surely is nice to have some template out in front of you. Member comments, John, as I see your hand up there.
Yeah, I have two things. The first is I noted that there's 3 states currently, Virginia, Oregon, and Utah, that have a pay by the mile usage tax, and Hawaii is also bringing it on in 24. The other comment I wanted to make is I met Scott Cole in 1986 when we were both students at North Carolina State University. So I've knew him for almost 40 years. And I had the enviable task of calling one of our mutual friends to inform him that he passed. And we were talking yesterday. And my friend said, if Scott were here, he would probably tell us to live each day to the fullest and enjoy life, because you never know when it's going to be your turn to go home, right? So he died much too young. He's a great guy. And I just wanted to share that memory and those thoughts. So thank you.
All right, thank you, John.
Amen to that.
Amen to
I
that.
worked with Scott
Definitely.
for
I'm going to
years.
jump over to Craig
Sorry,
real
I
quick
just
there.
wanted to Agree with you.
Along that line, I would ask we adjourn the meeting in honor and memory of Scott.
All right, so with that, that motion is up. Second it that way. All right, we got that all in favor. Want to wish everybody luck, those who are up for re-election this cycle around. So wish everybody luck. I know it's a lot of work. I know that I'm very busy with all the things that we have to deal with on campaign. So wish you all a bunch of luck and have a safe journey home.